good aspects is it gives the president the ability to strike out some of the more out of control earmarks. Maybe would strike out the National Peanut Festival. It would also give presidents, though, a tool for retribution against people of the other party and to reward members of his own party. That's my fear. So he's going to strike out the National Peanut Festival because a Republican requested that, but the Water-Free Urinal Initiative requested by a Democrat, maybe they'll leave that one in. So maybe on balance, end up saving money because he strikes out half of the nonsense. But I have to admit, a little troubled by use of it as a political tool. But you'd still have to get over the constitutional hurdle to it. I think on balance, I'm probably for it, if we can pass an amendment. Because times are tough and we need to set priorities and we need to cut wherever possible. And if it's the president that's going to do that, then I'd be okay with that too. Did that answer your question, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, miss. I can repeat the question.
I don't even know if this is a question, but when you began speaking tonight and you talked about learning from your parents' service, I can say, as an individual, that I have not given the service to my country that I should have. And here I am, Grandma Betty. And I think about my children and grandchildren and the mess we are in. I taught school for 35 years, and I can remember the Great Society, and this sounds really pretty good, But again, here we are. And my husband and I have talked about the fact that the president of our country can only be in office for 8 years. And we have this thought that maybe Congress shouldn't be allowed to just be there, and be there. That's a part of maybe the big problems.
Sure.
My question was, I understand, I heard on the news this evening that today is the day that the outgo of Social Security exceeds the income. What's going to happen? What's the solution to this?
Two questions. If I could distill your question down, ma'am, term limits, and sir, Social Security. Let me address both in turn. Starting with term limits, here are my thoughts on term limits. Our founding fathers did discuss this at some length. They came from states, many of which had state constitutions that did have term limits in their legislature. Many still do have term limits. And you know what? It seems to work. Those legislatures don't always get as much done, but I would argue that can be a really good thing. And here are the counter arguments to term limits oftentimes. We have elections. Those are term limits. Why deny people the opportunity to vote for legislators that they regard as effective and competent? Well, to me, that is not an entirely compelling argument because you have so many things working against that argument. One of the things you have is politicians drawing their own maps, called gerrymandering. Under our democratic system, representative democracy, we like to think that we choose our leaders. But in a sense, the politicians choose the voters when they're drawing the maps. And so I think that's one thing working against the argument that elections will take care of the politicians that have lost their way. The other thing is the franking privilege. This is the privilege of members of Congress that, let me use Barron Hill as an example. He sends out mailers, frequently right around election time, but they really resemble campaign pieces. Brightly colored things, oftentimes printed by the same companies that do political campaign mail, with nice pictures on it, and really doesn't inform you of very much. Barron Hill, standing up for fiscal responsibility. It's got 4 or 5 bullet points about all the money he's throwing your way, and then that's it. The franking mail privilege was really designed to keep constituents informed, to educate you about what he's doing in Washington, and it's lost that purpose. So that's another thing that kind of upsets the balance of our system. So, getting back to your question, I do think that, and I don't have an optimal number of years laid out, but I would be open to term limits. I think it would be a nice corrective. We have a deep bench in this country, 310 million people. There are plenty of people qualified, probably some here in this auditorium, without question, to go to Washington, to serve their country, and to come back and live under the very laws they helped create. And to me, we need to get back to that ethic of the citizen legislator. Now, in order to get this done, it would require a constitutional amendment, and I am not a big fan of unilateral term limit pledges. In other words, if we had public-spirited people of goodwill running for Congress around the country, and all of them pledged to serve 2 terms, 4 years, and they all came home after 4 years, and that kept happening, the only people who stayed any period of time in Washington were the people who aspired to be career politicians. Well, guess who's going to control the agenda in Washington? Speaker of the House, every committee chairmanship. It's going to be the career politicians. And so that's an unintended consequence of these people of goodwill who make these term limit pledges. In short, I would support a reasonable term limit amendment. Sir, you asked about Social Security. I grouped together Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as the 3 social welfare programs that constitute most of that $60 trillion in unfunded liabilities. As we look into the future, most of those programs, we don't know how we're going to fund them. We have no idea. And right now our plan is to pass the debts on to our kids and grandkids. So we have all sorts of deficits in Washington. We have a budget deficit, we have a trade deficit, and we have a leadership deficit. So all I can tell you, sir, is one of 435 members, I will be part of, I hope, a large group, but definitely a small group, that's going to sit down at a table and tackle these issues. I'm not prepared here tonight to embrace the Brookings Institution progressive plan for reform of Social Security, or the Heritage Foundation, where I used to work, the conservative plan for reforming Social Security, or the Cato Institute, libertarian plan. There's all sorts of good plans out there, but ultimately people on both sides of the aisle have to come together and get it done. I think we can. I think there's a window of opportunity here. With this down economy, there's real appetite for getting things done and making tough choices in Washington. And I'll tell you, that's why I'm involved in this. We have too many mediocre politicians in Washington who go there for the name, the title, and not really to accomplish things. I would be a workhorse and not a mere show horse. Any questions? Yes, sir. You can just bark out an issue area if you want me to talk about it a bit.
Thank you, Todd. My name is James Mazza, and I'd like to call myself a political refugee from California. And when I moved here, I could have told you folks about Nancy Pelosi. But what I wanted to ask you about is, in the last couple of days, 14 states have filed suits against the federal government to stop the unfunded mandates which are associated with the Health Care Reform Act. This may or may not be a unified action by the time you are inaugurated. But what are your thoughts on the action of the state of